In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Now, we have a new case we're going to be covering today, and this one is going to require multiple parts. It might be maybe 3 or 4 parts at this point, and while I am publishing these episodes, I am still deep in the research process. So if I find anything new that contradicts what is published in some of these first episodes, I will correct it as I go. Now, I have submitted public records requests for multiple cases that we're going to talk about that are all kind of related. So if I get anything back, we will do a deep dive on that. But the main case we're going to talk about today in this series is the unsolved 1980 murder of Rose Burkert and Roger Atkison. They were murdered at a Holiday Inn near the Amana colonies in Iowa, kind of near Williamsburg, Iowa. Now, there's a few other cases we're going to talk about in relation to this one because they are very similar, but I want to make sure that they have their own episodes. I firmly believe that this case and the other ones that we're going to talk about are solvable. I think advancements in forensic technology and the right information getting to the right people could be what brings in a break. So let's go ahead and get started. It was around 1 p.m. on Saturday, September 13th, 1980, when a housekeeper working at the Holiday Inn in the Amana colonies near Williamsburg, Iowa, got to room 260. She had been cleaning other rooms, and the guests in 260 were set to check out. And by this time, the guests should have been gone already. Now, I worked as a housekeeper all throughout high school and for a lot of college. And this might be a little bit in the weeds, but when you're a housekeeper, you have certain rooms that are what we called stayovers. So the guest was still in the room, but you go in, change out their garbage, get their towels and stuff like that. But then you had checkouts. And with the checkout rooms where they are fully leaving and you need to completely clean the room head to toe, you kind of have to wait and save a lot of those till the end because, some people like to wait until the last minute to check out or they get an extended checkout. So in this instance, it looks like the people in room 260 were supposed to be checking out that Saturday. And so she gets to that room around 1 p.m. Now, the housekeeper knocks on the door and got no answer. She actually knocked several times and also tried calling the room, got no answer on the phone, and she tried to open the door, but it was locked. Now, she could hear that a television was on inside the room, so I think she believed that people were still in there. That's probably why she's knocking a ton, all of that, trying to get in. But now, as a housekeeper, even in the 1980s, I would assume that she had a master key, right? Like when I worked as a housekeeper, I have a key that can open every single door. I don't know when Holiday Inns, and specifically this one, switched from physical metal keys to key cards. I saw online that switch started taking place during the 80s and 90s, so it's possible that this room still had a physical key, but it says she tried the door, but it was locked. Now, an article published on September 19th, 1980 says she then went to get a pass key from her manager. Now, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the locks on these doors and what it means when they say she tried the door, it was locked, and then she got a pass key, and we're going to get back to this because I think it's important. But to continue, the housekeeper gets a pass key, she comes back to the room, opens the door, and first sees that there's someone laying in the bed. She might initially be thinking that guests were still sleeping. I've definitely walked in on guests sleeping before, but she steps in the room a little bit further. She then sees a horrific scene. Now, the housekeeper reportedly runs back to get her manager. He goes into the room, sees the scene, and calls police. I will say that other articles do write that the housekeeper never went into the room, that she tried to open the door and called the room, but when there was no response, she got the manager and went in. Either way, they discover the bodies of 2 individuals laying on the bed. The victims were eventually identified as 22-year-old Rose Burkert and 32-year-old Roger Atkison. Rose was a nurse trainee, and Roger worked as a telephone installer and repairman. We will dive into Rose and Roger's story later, but first I want to walk through the crime scene. The scene was brutal, and this is probably the most in-depth I have ever gone into a crime scene for any of the cases I have covered. But there's a lot of information out there, and I think there are specific aspects of the scene that are important from a behavioral perspective, so I want to walk through it in depth. Now, the information I'm going to walk through from the scene was not released all at once. In fact, investigators released very, very little in 1980 and the years following the murders. But in the decades since, more information has come out, and in 2019, an episode of The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes spotlighted this case, and some crime scene photos were used in that episode. And that really shows, I think, a lot of the details that the articles that eventually published some of the aspects of the scene were really missing. And I will put some of the photos on my Instagram. There are some photos that are graphic, even though they are blurred. I will put those on my Patreon if you're interested. So the information I'm going to use to describe the hotel room is what I have gathered based on reporting in the 40 plus years this has been unsolved. Some of the information is a little contradicting, and I will do my best to highlight those contradictions as I go. Let's first describe this specific hotel room and a layout. Now, the hotel room, room 260, was on the second floor of the hotel. When you walk into that hotel room, immediately to your left, there's a closet, followed by the door to the bathroom. When you walked into the bathroom, you would have the sink directly in front of you. The sink was kind of inset into a wooden-looking countertop, but it didn't have a lower cabinet, so you could see the bottom of the sink, and under that sink and wooden countertop, there was a trash can. To the left of the sink was the toilet, and to the left of that was a bath-shower combo. On the wall directly opposite the toilet was a towel bar and a large mirror, which took up the majority of the wall above the toilet and sink. Now, walking beyond the bathroom will bring you to the main bedroom. The room had one double-sized bed in it on the left side of the room, with a nightstand and lamp on both sides of the bed. The nightstand on the left side of the bed also had a telephone. On the right side of the room, so right in front of you when you walk in, was a TV, a long kind of dresser desk combo with a mirror on the wall above it, and there was another lamp on the desk itself. Then, the wall on the far end of the room had a window, though in photos it's covered completely by a curtain that spans the entire wall. It also has a table and chairs that are either always placed in the middle of that wall, or they're supposed to be kind of in the right-hand corner of the room. In the photos, it's in the middle of that wall, and the chairs are pulled out, which we'll get into. Now, let's talk about how Rose and Roger are found, and I will describe other elements of the crime scene, including where their personal items were, and a few other things. Roger and Rose were lying side by side, face down on the bed. Rose was on the left and Roger was on the right. Rose was almost entirely covered by the comforter. It looks like only a portion of her head was not covered. Roger's lower half was covered by the comforter, but from his torso up, he was uncovered. A 1992 article published in the Gazette says Roger was in undershorts and Rose was fully clothed. A 2020 FBI bulletin looking for information on the case also says Roger was only wearing his underwear and that Rose was fully clothed. Another article published on September 19th, 1980 in the Gazette said Rose was wearing blue jeans and a pink blouse, but that could have been a description of what she was last seen wearing. It's unclear if that's what she was wearing when she was found or if she had on nightwear. And I can't tell from the crime scene photos what she was wearing because she was covered with the comforter. The 1992 Gazette article has a drawing of the crime scene, which says it was redrawn from an Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation sketch. I will have this posted on my social media and Patreon. The drawing shows Rose's right arm bent at the elbow with her hand up toward her head, and her left arm straight down by her left side. I Can't verify that based on the crime scene photos, again, because of the comforter covering her, but I can say that the way Roger is depicted in the Gazette drawing is not accurate. Roger's right arm is depicted as slightly bent at the elbow but down by his side, and his left arm with his hand towards the headboard. But in the actual crime scene photo, I can see his right arm is bent and upward, with his hand being either next to his head, on the back of his head, or above his head. It's hard to tell exactly where his hand is because his head is blurred in the photo. There was blood and brain matter on the headboard, wall, sheets, and carpet. There is a lot of blood on the comforter where Rose's head should be, and what I can't tell is if the comforter was pulled up after she was struck, or if she was struck while the comforter was up. Rose and Roger were struck multiple times on the back of the head, and the blows are described as coming from an axe-like instrument. The Gazette article describes it as having a 3.5-inch blade, but they go further and suggest it was, quote, likely a roofer's hatchet or maybe even some kind of machete. The force of the strikes had been enough to split their heads open, and reports of Roger having multiple fingers severed from his hand suggest he might have lifted his hands up to protect himself. Alternatively, some have suggested that the two were perhaps ordered to lay on the bed with their hands behind their heads. Preliminary autopsies performed on Rose and Roger showed the couple died of, quote, severe skull lacerations. The Iowa County Medical Examiner, Stacy Howell, said the two were struck several times with an instrument strong and sharp enough to penetrate the skull. The murder weapon was not found at the scene. A notice put out by the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, released on March 25, 2020, provides more details on the injuries the two victims sustained. The injuries in this notice are described as stab wounds, but it says specifically, quote, the victims had been stabbed to death, possibly with an axe or hatchet that had a 3.5-inch blade. It says Rose had 12 stab wounds to her face, head, and neck/throat, and Roger had been stabbed 7 times, with wounds being to his arms, hands, face, head, and neck/throat. It also says, quote, including possible defensive wounds to his hands. Now, based on the 1992 depiction that I've talked about and the crime scene photos, the room was really in disarray. It doesn't look to me like Rose and Roger were just messy with their things, but it looks like their items were rifled through and strewn about. I don't have a picture of the floor on the left side of the bed, but the 1992 drawing depicts 2 suitcases and a pair of boots being on the ground on the left side of the bed. On the right side of the bed, so on the floor on Roger's side, it looks like Roger's wallet is on the ground, and there are bits of paper and receipts that are torn up and strewn across the floor. And there's other debris you can see pictured on the floor among the paper, and articles describe that as being soap shavings. Also on Roger's side, I said there was a table in the middle of the room by the window. Well, 2 chairs had been pulled up right next to the bed. The chairs are different styles. I think one belonged to the table and the other was perhaps more decorative and just sat in a corner. But the chair on the left has something draped on it, almost covering the entirety of the part you sit on and the backrest, and it looks to me to be a white towel. On the bed itself, next to Rose's body up near the pillows, is Rose's wallet, a pair of glasses, what I think are keys, and something that looks like a deck of cards wrapped in a rubber band with a floral design on them. Now, their belongings are all over the floor in front of that long dresser, the TV, and under the desk portion, as well as their items are scattered on top of that. It's hard to tell in the photos what it all is, but this is what I can make out based on the photos and what has been written in articles. On the floor, there was a brown purse, a white gym-type bag, what looks like some articles of clothing, a small notebook, some hairbrushes, a comb, a tube of maybe chapstick, some papers, and something an article described as a hot lather machine. I wasn't familiar with this, but according to what I see online, that was a machine that would dispense warm shaving cream. On the top of the desk, it looks like there are some toiletries, maybe a thing of perfume, more keys, some coins, what looks like a driver's license with a female photo on it, and some sort of small case that's black on the outside and red on the inside. There's an ashtray and more papers. Further to the left of all of that, there's something white. I can't tell what it is. It could be white packaging or paper. I'm not sure. But the room is a mess. Their belongings were reportedly rifled through and money was stolen. The articles say approximately $200, but I don't know what wallet it came from. I did read later on that a partial fingerprint was reportedly lifted from Rose's belongings at the scene. Now let's go into the bathroom because I think there's a lot of important things to discuss in there. In the bathroom, there is a towel hanging off of the sink. And on the sink counter, there's an ashtray, there's a tissue holder, but there's also a tube of Crest toothpaste next to it. Some reports describe the toothpaste as being crushed, but it doesn't really look that way to me. It just looks like someone had squeezed it. Now, I can't see inside the sink itself based on these photos, but articles say the sink was stained with blood and that the blood had been, quote, splattered around. There's something that looks like a little hotel soap on the floor in front of the toilet, and in the bathtub, there's a small towel and toothpaste is squirted into the tub. Now, I don't believe that the shower had been used because the shower curtain's not like fully extended out, but it's hanging directly in the center of the shower, and there's a folded towel over the top of it, and it looks to me to be how the housekeepers might have left the room after cleaning it. Articles talk about a message that had been written in the bathroom. Now, the 1992 Gazette article says a message had been scrawled on the bathroom door using white Motel soap, but had been wiped almost completely off. Others say the word "this" was written in soap on the bathroom mirror, and that the soap had been carved. Some articles say a message was written on the bathroom mirror and almost everything except the word "this" had been wiped away. The FBI says the word "this" was printed on the bathroom door, possibly using soap. So there's some contradictions here. Was it on the bathroom door? Was it on the mirror? Based on the pictures, I don't see anything on that big mirror in front of the sink, so that leads me to believe that there is a mirror on the back of the bathroom door, and there's just no pictures of it. Now, an article by Symphony Sherman with KGAN published on May 25th, 2021 says that during a 2015 review of the case, investigators went through each piece of evidence collected at the scene and found a previously unidentified sample of male DNA located on a bathroom towel. They believe, based on the blood in the sink, that the killer washed his hands. Now, I haven't seen if anything has come back from that DNA, but I have submitted a records request for anything on this case and specifically asked if there had been testing on this DNA, so we will see if we get anything back. The hotel room was described as not having shown any signs of forced entry, and this was a hotel where the access to the room would be from the interior of the hotel. It's not one of those hotels where, like, the door to your room is outside, if you know what I mean. It's just kind of like a standard hotel. And we'll talk more about this later on, but hotel guest interview didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. No one breaking in, no shouts, nothing. Let's talk a little bit more about this hotel. The hotel at the time was a Holiday Inn. It's now a Ramada, but it was located right off of the interstate in Williamsburg, Iowa. It's near the Amana colonies, which today is kind of a tourist attraction in Iowa. And honestly, like, I grew up in Iowa and I thought the Amana colonies were communities of Amish. I knew that there were shops and restaurants and all of that. Just growing up, that's how everyone described the Amana colonies, that it was an Amish community. Based on the research I did into this, that is not the case. It's not an Amish community, but rather the colonies were originally settlers from Germany. And they had a kind of specific religion. It seems like they were fleeing from a church and wanted to set up their own sort of commune type society in Iowa. not Amish. I still am not entirely sure of what this place is, but I think the important part here is that it was a busier location and really one of the few tourist attractions in Iowa, like in the state. And I think even in the 80s, a lot of people were coming around to kind of visit this community here. Also, I want to note that the hotel was completely booked solid the night of the murders. And we'll talk about that more later. The hotel is kind of like built in a square, and room 260 just happens to be at the completely opposite end of the hotel from where the front desk is. Now, in the episode, The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes, that covers this case, Paul Holes and another lady go to the hotel to kind of get a feel for the layout and the room itself. The hotel workers they spoke with said that the only way the killer could have gotten to the room would have been to walk through the main doors right by the lobby. Then they'd have to have gone up the stairs and down the hallway. They said while there were entrances at other points around the perimeter of the hotel, you would need a key to open those doors. I mean, you've probably been to a hotel before, right? You know, you understand what they're saying here. But I think that this is making a couple of assumptions. One, the assumption the hotel workers are making is that the perpetrator wasn't a guest. And also that the exterior doors were actually locked and shut and functioning the way that they're supposed to be, right? So far in my research, I will say, relating to the exterior doors, I haven't seen anything on if the exterior doors were found to be broken, but it's possible, right? And it's possible that one of the outside doors just didn't latch properly, or that someone walked in right behind someone else who opened the door with their key. And I just want to say that because the hotel was completely booked, because this was kind of a busy area, even if the killer walked right in through the front door and just like walked purposefully to the very corner room at the very back of the hotel, like no one, I don't think would have noticed him, right? Because there were so many people walking in and out. I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, and this is going to be the kind of the last point I want to talk about before we kind of wrap up today's episode. But I want to talk about how the killer might have gotten into room 260. Now, hotel employees were interviewed, and as mentioned before, there was no sign of forced entry into the hotel room. So a big question was, how did the killer get in the room? Dean Morse, the hotel manager, was adamant that the hotel and staff were not responsible for someone getting into the room. He insisted that they do not hand out keys at random, and they don't even give out room numbers. And right, that's a standard policy for any reputable hotel. The ones I worked at were like this. You needed your name. Your name needed to be listed on the reservation in order to receive a room key, and you would have to show ID to verify that you were who you said you were. And if someone called looking for someone at the hotel, we were not really even allowed to confirm or deny if a guest was at our hotel. And we certainly wouldn't give out room numbers, but, you know, we could transfer calls to specific rooms. But this is one of my big questions. Since there was no sign of forced entry, how did the killer get into the room? So I want to talk about the doors and the locks, and I think I just need to talk this out. I might be making this more complicated in my head than it needs to be. If the housekeeper couldn't get into the room because it was locked and there was no sign of forced entry, that gives me a couple of possibilities. If this was a standard hotel door, like what we see today, and locked automatically when it shut, she would have had to have had a master key. As a housekeeper, you need one if the doors automatically lock, right? Either a master key or a copy of each of the keys to all the doors. Like, there's no other way for you to get in. I just don't understand why she wouldn't have a key there, right? So if the door automatically locked and she couldn't get in with her master key, that would mean that the inside lock was engaged. That could be the chain lock or a deadbolt. This has happened to me before, right? Like the deadbolt inside was accidentally engaged, and so my master key wouldn't work, right? And so you have to go get a special tool to open the door if the deadbolt is locked and in place. But I'll say that like the deadbolt accidentally locking, it's not supposed to do that. That would be like a crazy coincidence, right? So there's that option. Okay, or the other option here is that the door didn't lock automatically. so guests would just need to lock the doors on their own when they get inside the room. But if this was the case, and she went to open the door, that would be unlocked normally and couldn't get inside, so had to get a master key from her boss, that would mean that the door was locked from the inside. And this doesn't even make sense to me that like a door would automatically, or like wouldn't automatically lock. I don't know. That just doesn't make any sense to me. But in both of these cases, right, like how would the door be locked from the inside? I guess possible that the deadbolt was accidentally locked, but that would be an insane coincidence, right? Or was it that the housekeeper for some reason just didn't have her master key? But that does not make any sense to me, like absolutely none. I don't know. If I'm missing something here, please let me know. I've been researching this case for a long time, so I might be looking over something completely obvious, right? But there's the big question on how the killer got out, why the door was locked, but how did they get in, right? Like that doesn't make sense. The only way that the killer could have gotten inside would be to use a stolen master key if a staff member didn't provide a key to the room, or if they were let into the room, right? I mean, it's possible that the doors didn't lock automatically and Rose and Roger didn't lock it from the inside and the person just walked in. I don't know. Those are some of the questions I have on the locks, and I'm hoping I get some more clarification on that if I get any records back from my records request. But I think that's where we're going to end it today. Okay, we've gone over the crime scene in detail. I want you to just kind of picture the state of the room and how everything was. There's the weird parts like the soap shavings, the toothpaste that was squirted into the tub, a potential message written on a mirror. Keep all of those things in mind. We're going to talk about those more later on when we get into suspects. But in next week's episode, we are going to talk about the initial investigation, and we're going to dive into who Rose and Roger were. We're going to talk about what we know about their lives, and we're going to talk about their last movements and what they were doing before they got to the hotel. Stay tuned for that. This was a lot that I threw on you. Let me know if you have any questions. Send me an email. Give us a comment on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, wherever you are listening. Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you next week with part 2. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.